Welcome to our Meet the Candidates debate for the June 7th provincial election in London North Centre. I'm Christine Teleski, and I'm thrilled to be joined by all 5 candidates in your riding. This is your chance to get to know who's running and decide who you want to vote for. So let's meet the candidates now. Starting on my left, we have Susan Troupe for the PC Party. We have Terence Kernaghan for the NDP, Paul McKeever for the Freedom Party, Kate Graham for the Liberal Party, and Carol Dick for the Green Party. Here's the format of the debate. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for an opening statement and up to 1 minute at the end of the hour for closing comments. Each candidate will be allowed to answer every question and will have 1 minute for that response. If the candidate goes over the allotted time, you'll hear the sound of the timing bell and they'll be asked to stop speaking at that time. If a specific candidate or party is mentioned by another, they may be granted a rebuttal, but those will be given at my discretion. And the amount of time allotted for those rebuttals will be 30 seconds. Now, before we came into the studio, we drew names to determine who would go first with opening statements, and Susan Troupe won that draw, so we will be starting with Susan. Go ahead whenever you're ready.
Thank you. I'm Susan Troupe, and I'm honored to be here as your Ontario Progressive Conservative candidate. I'm running for the same reason I ran when I was the Member of Parliament for London North Centre. We need a change in government, and we need to stop the waste and mismanagement of our taxpayer dollars. We are in the grips of a job crisis, a broken healthcare system, and a public health emergency. London has the lowest employment rate in all of Ontario. 1 in 3 working-age people in London do not have full-time employment, and 1 in 4 have no job at all. Hospital wait times are out of control. In London, we have the worst wait times in Ontario for thyroid, breast, liver, and pancreatic surgeries, leaving thousands suffering. And our local hospitals are among the worst in Canada for overcrowding. Hallway healthcare is not acceptable. We also face a public health emergency. Our city has the 3rd highest opioid hospitalization rate in the country. The serious challenges we face today are a result of London's Liberal and NDP politicians who have neglected our city and sat on the sidelines while our most vulnerable suffer. They have voted together time after time to increase your taxes and raise your hydro rates. Like you, I'm fed up. This is not what Ontarians signed up for. We're going to reduce your hydro rates, reduce your taxes, put an end to hallway healthcare, scrap the carbon tax, restore accountability, and open Ontario for business. On June 7th, I'm asking for your support to end the vicious cycle of Liberal and NDP neglect. It's time now for a community to be represented at Queen's Park. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. For the NDP, Terence Kernaghan.
Thank you, Christine. I'm really pleased to be here to talk today about the issues that matter to the people in London. My name is Terence Kernaghan, and I'm your NDP candidate in London North Centre. I grew up in this city, and I'm proud to call London my home. I've been an elementary school teacher here for quite some time. After decades of Liberal and Conservative governments, families are feeling the squeeze, and life just seems to be getting harder. But in this election, we don't have to choose between bad and worse. We can choose Andrea Horwath and change for the better. I've been knocking on thousands of doors, and I've been hearing about that people want us to fix healthcare, to give dignity and respect to people in seniors care, and to make life more affordable by lowering hydro rates. Kathleen Wynne has failed to take action, and Doug Ford will simply cut and privatize. Simply put, Andrea Horwath has a better plan.
Thank you, Terence. For the Freedom Party, Paul McKeever.
Thank you. No new spending. If you remember nothing else today about your Freedom Party candidate, Paul McKeever, it's those 3 words. No new spending. Today you're going to hear a bewildering array of new spending promises by the other candidates. Doug Ford's PCs are promising to make you pay $5 billion to build new subways in Toronto. Kathleen Wynne's Liberals want you to pay for your neighbor's house repairs. Andrea Horwath's NDP want you to pay for your neighbor's sex change operation. The problem is they don't even have a plan to pay for the programs that already exist. We are already running a double-digit deficit, yet the NDP, the PCs, and the Liberals all want to borrow more to pay for their programs. Borrowed money today is a tax burden tomorrow. In my view, the time to live within your means is all the time. No new spending. If you agree, vote for your Freedom Party candidate, Paul McKeever, on June 7th. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. For the Liberal Party, Kate Graham.
Well, thank you very much, Christine, for having us here, and to each person at the table today. My name is Kate Graham, and I'm very proud to be your Liberal candidate in London North Centre. So I'll tell you a bit about me. I, first and foremost, am a Londoner. I've spent the last 10 years serving this community. I was a public servant at City Hall and as a volunteer. And I'm a graduate and a student at Western. I'm currently completing a PhD in political science focused on the leadership of Canada's cities. So I take politics very seriously. And I chose to run in this election because I know how important it is to our city. We have seen great progress. Our economy in Ontario is doing very well. We're outpacing every Canadian province, all of the G7 nations, and we're at the lowest unemployment rate in 20 years. But we know that this prosperity has been uneven. So London and southwestern Ontario continue to lag behind the rest of Ontario, and many London families continue to struggle. And so for the last 6 months, like my colleagues here, I've spent hours every day knocking on doors, talking to you about what matters to you in this election. And I have heard you loud and clear. Londoners want to see more invested in our healthcare system, specifically in mental health. We need to do things to make life more affordable, which is why increasing the minimum wage and making childcare and tuition more affordable for families is so important. I also hear that we care about growing our city's prosperity and protecting our environment, which is why projects like high-speed rail are so important. So I want to thank each of you for tuning in today. This election is really important, and I urge you to pay close attention. We're going to have a discussion today where you learn quite a bit about us, and you deserve more than party talking points. You deserve a candidate who understands the issues, who will listen to you, and who's running because they're passionate about representing our community. That's why I'm running to be your MPP, and that's why I'm interested in this discussion today. So thanks, Christine, and thanks to all of you.
Thank you, Kate. And finally, for the Green Party, Carol Dick.
Hi, I'm Carol Dick, and I'm proud to be your Green Party candidate for London North Centre. I am a community volunteer, and I currently sit on the board of directors for 2 prominent local NGOs, and I also serve as a member at large for an advisory committee for the city. I believe that London is a wonderful city to live, to work, and to raise a family, and I just want to do my part to make it better. I am passionate about the environment and about people and their well-being. It has led me to do a Master's of Law in Environmental Law, and most recently a Master's in Science from Oxford. I believe that if you do not take care of the planet, it will not take care of us. But I also understand that to affect real policy change for the environment, you have to engage a variety of stakeholders. It is the same when we talk about a number of the policy issues that we are dealing with in this election. We cannot be finger pointing. We have to work together to solve them. And we cannot fix problems by only treating the symptoms. We also have to look at the cause of the problems. So the most cost-effective way to deal with our healthcare, our education, housing problems, and poverty is to look back at it and to look at the big picture. And by doing that, we can create a long-term strategy for our province. So let's not look at the challenges that we are facing as threats. Let's look at them as opportunities. And let's look to the future and see the true potential of our province and of our citizens. And this June, let's vote for some Green candidates. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's jump right in and start by talking about healthcare, because I know this is an issue that's top of mind for all Ontarians. So the first question, and we're going to be starting with you, Terence, on this one. The term code gridlock is one that has unfortunately become very familiar for Londoners, meaning a hospital has reached or exceeded its capacity. I'd like to know how your party would address the healthcare crisis we're currently seeing. You can go ahead whenever you're ready.
Absolutely. Healthcare is something I hear about every single day. I was recently in the emergency room with my mother. We waited over 7 hours, and unfortunately, my mother was so frustrated that she ended up leaving in tears. Now, she was lucky. She didn't have any ill results after leaving the hospital, but I think about all the families who've been put in that position. That's a really unfortunate place to be. The fact that we have a hallway transfer protocol in place right now is simply unacceptable. The healthcare system is in crisis, and the frontline workers are doing their very utmost to maintain the level of care. We know that the last Conservative government closed 28 hospitals. Our current Liberal government fired 1,600 nurses since the start of 2015. Andrea Horvath and the NDP have a plan for change for the better. We're going to fully fund hospitals and make sure that we put a moratorium on nurse layoffs. That will be a change that we need in London's hospitals.
Okay, thank you, Terrence. Moving on to Paul McKeever.
Yeah, the term code gridlock or hallway healthcare comes about not as a side effect of carrying out the existing plan badly. Rather, it's an effect of having too much control over supply, too much control over demand. Supply is controlled, of course, by limiting the number of physicians that can be trained in the province. That was instituted by all the premiers in 1993. People forget that. Then we have a shortage of doctors. At the same time, the government is also limiting demand. They do this by rationing healthcare. In other words, imposing delays so that you're not diagnosed in time. You might not need the treatment. That saves the province money. By stacking people up in the hallways, the province saves money. It's not a bug, it's a feature. As long as we're rationing healthcare and controlling supply and demand, we're going to see this unusual and disturbing phenomenon. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Kate?
Of this election, it comes up every day at the door, and what you hear from people is kind of a mixed bag. So you hear people talk about incredible experiences with our healthcare system, where they and their families were taken care of by hardworking doctors and nurses, and received great support at a time when they really needed it. And then you do hear stories that would break your heart. And I think underneath this, we've got a system-wide issue where the supply and demand just aren't meeting up. There's enormous pressure on our healthcare system, and I think reasonably we can expect that this will intensify. The number of seniors, for example, in London is going to double in the next 20 years, putting huge pressure on our healthcare system. So it's really convenient at election time to say that, we've got some simple solution, we're going to fix it, vote for me, it's going to be perfect. That's not reality. I think people understand this is a complex system. We need to keep investing in hospitals. We need to keep investing in healthcare professionals. But we also need to look at the broader system to make sure that we're supporting people to live healthy lives.
Thank you. And Carol?
Yeah. So again, we need to look at the big picture. And with the Green Party, we think the best way to reduce the pressure off of our emergency rooms is to look at people and preventing illness and promoting health. Good ways to do that are to take care of poverty through a basic guaranteed income, because poverty is a major source of a lot of our illnesses. The other thing is to look at our air quality. Every summer there are so many children and seniors and those with compromised immune systems that end up in the hospitals because of respiratory distress with our rising temperatures. The other problem that we have is that there's people that don't have access to a primary health care giver. If you are able to see someone who can look at you before a problem becomes a crisis situation, that removes pressure off of our hospital system. So the Green Party would like to see more clinics open with nurse practitioners and more primary health care givers. And we would like to address a lot of the mental health issues that are there so that we can remove some of that pressure on our ERs.
Thank you. And Susan?
Hallway healthcare is totally unacceptable. For the last 15 years, the Liberals' mismanagement of the healthcare system has been defined by scandals and waste. The Liberals poured money into bureaucracy, and it was supported by the NDP. First thing we're going to do is listen to the healthcare professionals, the doctors and nurses. These are the same doctors and nurses who had their services cut by the Liberal government, and the nurses who had 1,500 nurses cut. I'd like to remind our viewers also that the NDP, when they were in power, cut 10,000. They reduced mental health care by 53 million and cut 10,000 healthcare beds. We're going to add healthcare beds. We're adding 30,000 healthcare beds in 10 years, and we're also investing in mental health, 1.9 billion. These two measures will help relieve some of the pressure that are on the hospitals right now, and then we will work again with the doctors and nurses to see what we have to do to ease more pressure. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any requests for rebuttals there? Did you want to speak back there, Kate, to the Liberal?
Sure. So the fact of the matter is we've seen more money invested in our healthcare system every single year under the past 15 years. London hospitals today receive about $1.3 billion a year in funding. And, the real answer here, I don't think is actually about money. I do believe we need to keep investing, but this is not a political issue. This should not be one where we're spending a lot of time kind of looking up 30-year-old history of, what went wrong. I'm interested in moving forward. Healthcare is important enough that we need to work together. So just to my colleagues here at the table, I'm less interested in kind of pointing blame, more interested in real ideas about how we can move forward.
Okay, let's move forward with this debate. because we don't want to run out of time. We have a lot to talk about. And closely related to healthcare, of course, is funding. So let's talk a little bit about the budget and the deficit. We are facing a deficit for 2018-2019. And I guess the elephant in the room is actually the provincial debt. So that's projected to hit $325 billion this year. So I'd like to hear a little bit about your budget, what your platform would lay out. Will you address the debt? Would you plan to balance the books, or do you believe that we need to keep spending? We're going to be starting with Paul McKeever from the Freedom Party on this one.
Yes, the Freedom Party is the only party fielding candidates who are running on a platform of a balanced budget this year, next year, every year. As I say, the best time to live within your means is every time, all the time. None of the other parties here with us today, represented by these candidates, has a plan to balance the budget. In particular, the Progressive Conservatives, who like to tout themselves as fiscally responsible, were asked, Doug Ford was asked, will you be running a balanced budget? And he said no. He declined to accept that. So the reason is he's going to borrow like all the rest. Freedom Party is not going to run a deficit. We will stand opposed to that. We will vote against that at all turns. We have to be more responsible with the money we have. We don't have a money shortage. We have a spending problem in this province, and that's how the problem has to be dealt with.
Okay. Kate?
Sure. So Ontario does carry a lot of debt, and that's built up over Conservative, NDP, and Liberal governments. And the important measure here, and it sounds like a big number, and it certainly is, but is to keep in context the size of the debt to the GDP. So economists use a measure of debt to GDP, and it should be within a reasonable range. In Ontario, it's about 37% right now. To put that in context, in the States, the federal debt is about 105%. When you get into real trouble, like in Greece, it's about 180%. So we need to really carefully manage it, make sure it stays within a reasonable range. You know, the big cost drivers on the provincial budget are things like education and healthcare. Frankly, I'm not hearing at the door that people want to see less of those things. They want to see more. So we need to have a plan. The important thing here is that if you're interested in this, you can take a look at the provincial budget. There's an entire chapter on the long-term plan of how to manage the debt. You should be asking for details on this. Make sure that there's actually a plan in place. It's one thing to say we want to eliminate the debt. It's another thing to have a plan.
Thank you, Kate. Carol?
So the Green Party takes more of a sectoral approach to things. We haven't looked at the debt or the deficit specifically, but we look for areas where there is waste and where we can direct funds in other areas. For instance, if we were to close the Pickering account when its license expires in August, that will save the province billions of dollars. Also, if we were to combine the two school boards to create one school board, that will reduce waste, and that money can be funneled into our education system. We can also implement the 2012 Drummond Report. That will free up $4.1 billion that we can direct into mental health care. So if we look at different ways that we can fix things, we're not necessarily balancing the budget, but we're making sure that the services that our province needs are still there at a low cost.
Okay. Thank you, Carol. Susan?
Thank you. Our plan would see Ontario run a deficit in the first year and then return to a balance thereafter and help pay down the crushing levels of debt and make more money available for services. But what we really need to do is raise tax revenues, not by raising taxes, and we will do this by bringing jobs to Ontario. We need more people to carry the load, not more load carried by the people. Kathleen and Andrew's policies are job killers, and because they are killing private sector jobs, they are killing tax revenues for Ontario that fund nursing, healthcare, infrastructure, schools, and so on. Andrea and the NDP and Kathleen and the Liberals believe the only way to pay for their platforms is to make the balance of the private sector pay more, rather than leveraging the value of a better private sector. Better manufacturing, industrial, and mining jobs will create increased tax revenues for the province. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Terrence for the NDP.
No matter who you are, everyone is concerned about budgeting and concerned about their finances. Now, with the NDP, we know the difference between good debt and bad debt. A good debt is like a mortgage where you have something at the very end of it. A bad debt is where you simply waste money and don't see any realization of your investment. You know, we've gone from bad to worse with Conservative and Liberal governments. People in London know that austerity budgets simply don't work. We don't want the government of Doug Ford, which will cut and privatize and reduce corporate tax rates, because we know that does not stimulate the economy or create jobs. With the Liberal government, they lied and sold off hydro, and all families have felt the squeeze, no matter who you are. With the NDP, we have the best fiscal track record of any party. We understand the good difference between good and bad debt. We are going to fundamentally change the way government operates, and we're going to invest in people's health. That way, we will see the dividend realized when people are healthier and hospitals are better able to function.
Sure. Susan, certainly I'll give you a response to that.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a clear note that we are not the ones that are cutting any services, and we're not cutting jobs. We are the Conservative Party, the Progressive Conservative Party, and we are the ones that create opportunities for Ontarians. And I would like to remind you that also the NDP, when Bob Rae was there, since we're going back a few years, cut 125,000 jobs.
Okay, and Kate, I'll give you one as well. You were mentioned there as well.
Sure. Actually, it was more just a question for Susan out of curiosity. So you talked about raising revenues, and I know you ran as a candidate when your party was campaigning on a carbon tax. Your new leader has said that he wants to eliminate cap and trade, which generates billions of dollars in revenue in Ontario right now. It also supports a lot of initiatives that make us protect our environment, lead greener lives. What do you personally think? Just out of curiosity, and if there isn't a plan to raise that revenue in one of those two ways, I'd be interested to know what exactly is the plan.
Susan, I'll give you the option. You may choose to answer that or not. Typically, a rebuttal is not designed to frame a question at another candidate, but if you'd like to speak to that, you can.
I would just like to point out that the Auditor General found $1 billion in efficiencies that were not cutting any services or cutting jobs. So there's a lot of money wasted out there, and we know how much the Liberals have wasted.
Okay, we're going to stop there. We're going to move on because we are going to run out of time quickly here with the amount that we need to get to. Let's talk a little bit more about the economy and the cost of living for Ontarians, because I know that is a major concern you're probably hearing about at the door as well. So I'd like to hear what is your party's plan to keep the cost of living down for Ontarians to make sure that life is affordable? And we'll be starting with Kate from the Liberal Party.
Sure. So our economy is doing very well in Ontario, as I said. We are outperforming other provinces, and it's the first time I can remember that London's unemployment rate is actually below the national average. So we're seeing good things happen. Since Kathleen Wynne became Premier 5 years ago, there's 10,000 more Londoners working. We've seen our unemployment rate drop from 9.1% to where it currently sits at 5.6%. So there's lots of good work happening. We do need to continue to invest in people, though, make sure that people have the opportunity to pursue their field of choice by making post-secondary education affordable, providing apprenticeships, and probably at a bigger picture level, we also need to invest in things that we know create jobs. One of the reasons I'm running as a Liberal is I really want to see high-speed rail come to London and southwestern Ontario. There's nothing else we're talking about today that will create more jobs, both immediately in terms of the actual project, and also will lead to long-term prosperity for the city. So it's those big picture projects that I'm really excited about.
Okay, thank you. Carol, on cost of living.
Yeah, so one of the major costs that Londoners are experiencing right now is housing. The Green Party has a plan that for all the developers must create 20% affordable housing for the city. We are in a crisis for housing here, and we must make sure that there is housing for all of our citizens. Also, we must address the fact there is a lot of poverty, and for a lot of people, they have to change their careers, or they maybe need to go back to school, or maybe they're caring for somebody who is ill. So we would like to see a basic guaranteed income that will help people through those hard times. We are also the only party to put forward a platform of universal pharmacare and universal dental. The NDP will say that they are doing that, but in fact the universal pharmacare only covers 125 medications, and the dental care is not for all citizens. Those are major costs for everybody, and we believe that by supporting those costs, we can really help people along with their bills.
Thank you. Susan?
Thank you. It breaks my heart that the Ontario Liberals and NDP have lost more than 300,000 manufacturing jobs. Because of Bill 148, Ontario's economy lost 51,000 jobs in January. And for students alone, Bill 148 has killed more than 31,000 student jobs. That's a job lost for every 5 minutes. Did you know that London has experienced a 58% increase in Ontario Works caseloads? We want to open Ontario for business. We want to create jobs. We need Ontario competitive. When we create jobs, we create revenue. NDP and Liberals have no plan but to tax you. The Liberals over the past 15 years have ballooned the debt to over $300 million, and we pay $1 billion a month in interest.
Okay, just a reminder, this is a question about cost of living for Ontarians. Moving on to Terence Kernahan from the NDP.
You know, I'll never forget the picture of Stephen Harper waving from the train at Electromotive Diesel after handing out $5 million, only to have all of those jobs at Electromotive Diesel cut. I will never forget all the people who were left without jobs and unable to support their families for a period of time. That's unacceptable. Life has become very difficult for people in London. Now, we know that Doug Ford and the Conservatives have no plan to lower the hydro rates. That's one of the most unaffordable things that we have. And we know that Kathleen Wynne lied and sold off Hydro One. The Conservatives started the privatization process back when they were in government. However, with Andrea Horvath and the NDP, we have a plan to buy back Hydro and make sure that we can lower bills. It is our plan to lower bills by 30%. We also want to provide universal dental care and pharmacare for everyone. And to reply to Carol, yes, we will start off with 125 medications, and we will look forward to expanding that in the future. That's something that we can all count on.
Okay, we'll do a couple of responses there. We'll start with Kate this time.
Sure.
Do I get to give my answer first?
Yes, yeah, we'll
Oh.
do rebuttals and then you can go back and you can give
Oh,
your response
sure.
to the question. If you'd like to do it that way. Okay.
We're also excited to talk about jobs, but I think we misunderstood you wanting us to talk about affordability. So just to respond to a number of the comments. So when we talk to London families about what is driving their cost of living, Carol rightly mentioned housing. For most families, that's a huge cost. We also hear about families spending $17,000 a year on childcare. We hear about families who have, a couple children who want to go to college or university and are unable to do so right now. Those are real expenses that we need to address. Again, those are some reasons why I'm running as a Liberal. These are not campaign promises for us. We've made the most transformative changes to OSAP. There's about 270,000. Thank you.
Thank you. And Susan?
I just wanted to respond to Terrence's comment about electromotive. Terrence is a president of a union, so I know he knows how that works. So when the union was calling the bluff of electromotive, it is a private company, I want to point out. It's not government run. And I can tell you that those people I have been talking to, that I talked to when I was a member of Parliament that were losing their jobs, said they'd rather stay there and have $2 less or whatever the amount was than lose their job entirely. The company could afford it, and it couldn't afford it, and they left. And that's what's going to happen with more companies in Ontario.
Okay. And Terrence, we'll give you a quick 30 seconds there.
Well, firstly, I am not the president. Secondly, I do know that the people on the picket lines would have enjoyed seeing you at the picket line there, Susan, but unfortunately no one heard from you. That's a disappointment.
They heard from me at my office.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's move on and give Paul a chance to answer the original question about cost of living.
Sure.
Yeah.
A lot of talking going on. What I haven't heard, though, what I'm shocked, if I can just go that far, to not hear, is anybody talking about the cost of electricity. The Liberal government, as we all know, has set up special contracts for wind, solar, even gas, at which these companies, these generators, are being paid at well above market rates to provide electricity to generate it, whether it's used or not. Those contracts, wind and solar, Ontario's Court of Appeal has said, can be pulled, can be struck without any penalty to the province. Freedom Party is the only party right now that's saying it's time to pull those contracts. Free market competition is what we need, not only at the generation stage, but at the retail stage. You shouldn't have to buy from only one supplier. You should have a choice of suppliers, and they should compete on price. Want to keep the cost of living down, deal with electricity. Freedom Party's got a plan for it.
Okay, let's deal with electricity right now, because I think that is a good point, something that we need to talk about. Between 2015 and 2017, the Ontario government sold off more than 50% of Hydro One in a deal that was controversial. So I'd like to hear from each of these parties. What is your plan for the future of energy in Ontario? And we're going to be starting this time with Carol Dick from the Green Party.
So the Green Party obviously would like to diversify where we're getting our energy from. Right now, first off, we have to scrap the nuclear power plants. Though right now they are costing us 16.5 cents per kilowatt hour, but we can bring in hydropower from Quebec for 5 cents per kilowatt hour. That is at a huge savings to all of Ontario. Plus, we can build a power saving station right on the border with Manitoba and bring in cheap power from there. But we'd like to see it expand even more. We can bring in solar panels. We can go towards more wind energy. Just by going into clean technology and moving more in the direction of solar power, we can create many great jobs in Ontario to help with our energy policies. So we really need to move away from some of the antiquated ways that we are getting energy that are extremely expensive and move in a different direction.
Thank you, Carol. Susan, the future of energy in Ontario.
Thank you. Only the Ontario PC Party will reduce hydro costs by an additional 12% and clean up the systemic structural issues with our hydro system created by the Wind Liberals and abetted by the NDP. As an FYI, also for listeners, the NDP's plan to reduce hydro bills will take 30 years. Our plan provides relief for ratepayers from day one. A PC government will responsibly reduce your hydro bill and let you keep more of your hard-earned money. We are also going we are canceling the carbon tax and the Green Energy Act.
Okay, thank you, Susan. Moving on to Terence from the NDP.
Yes, you know, the people of Ontario built the hydro system. It was with their blood, sweat, and tears. And in a moment, in short-sightedness, Kathleen Wynne sold it off. The beginnings of privatization started with the last Conservative government, where bills went up 25%. Doug Ford and the Conservatives are not going to drive bills down. They're going to engage in a costly $40 billion borrowing scheme, which is basically kicking the can down the road to our kids and grandkids to pay back later. Andrea Horvath and the NDP, we will make sure to buy it back so that it is, again, a public service. Now, what I also love about our platform is that we're going to put legislation in place to make sure that any future government, if they try to sell off a treasured public asset, won't be able to do so. It will have to be put to a referendum, so people like you and me and all the people who have to pay these exorbitant bills will have a chance to have their say.
Okay, let's keep moving down the line on this one. Next is Paul McKeever from the Freedom Party.
Well, what's the plan for energy? Freedom Party's plan for energy, as I say, first of all, we've got to scrap those wind and solar contracts immediately, require all providers to compete on price. If you don't have the best price, we don't buy what you're generating. Secondly, we've got to scrap the Green Energy Act. Thankfully, Susan said that. The only problem we have here is that at the one hand, we have the PC saying we'll scrap the Green Energy Act. At the same time, they're saying they're going to reduce your prices by 12%. The only way they can do that, of course, is by taking money that you're paying in taxes and subsidizing your energy bill. So this is just a shell game for the PCs. This is not fundamental change. The last thing, when you talk about competition in retail and electricity, consider this. You get your bill nowadays, it says you paid this much for distribution, this much for transmission, this much for global adjustment. When you go to get a burger at the burger shop, they don't make you pay for delivery of the meat, cooling of the building, and the uniforms worn by the people there. One price on the bill per kilowatt hour, everybody competes. That's the Freedom Party plan.
Okay, thank you. Susan, did you want a response to what Paul was referring to as a flaw in your plan there?
No, I don't see a flaw in our plan. And I'm not sure where 40, I think it was $40 billion, I think someone said, but that might have been Terence. I don't know where these numbers are coming from, but we have a plan. We're the only ones at this table that actually want to reduce hydro. We want to make sure that Ontarians have more money in their pockets. Everyone else wants to tax them, and they want to tax the businesses.
Okay, we're going to move on to Kate on this one.
Sure. So I think we need to step back a little bit and look at what's happened in our energy sector in Ontario. So 15 years ago, we were at a point where we had chronically underinvested, I mean parties of all stripes, in the infrastructure that we needed to power Ontario. And we also made a bold decision to eliminate coal, which was a very cheap but also extremely dirty source of power. With eliminating coal, we all breathe cleaner air. We've seen visits of people who struggle with asthma to the emergency room drop by 50%, and we don't have smog days anymore. So that is a really, a big success story that we should celebrate. We've had to make up that power elsewhere. I think there's a lot that we could chew on here. I wish we had more time, frankly, including looking at nuclear, which is about 60% of Ontario's power right now. We keep hearing that affordability is an issue. This is not a campaign promise. The Liberals have put in a plan that have reduced bills by an average of 25%. We need to keep working together to find the right mix where it's green energy but also affordable for people.
Okay. We are just over halfway through the hour, so I want to take a second to just sort of shift gears. I know you've been doing a lot of knocking on doors, probably meeting a lot of candidates, and I'd like to hear from you what Ontarians are telling you are the biggest issues when you're knocking at the door. So what do you think are the biggest issues to Londoners specifically in this election? Starting with Susan.
Thank you, and that's a great question, and I've been knocking on doors for about a year and a half. Some of the issues I've heard are similar to the ones I heard as an MP. And healthcare is for sure number one, followed by more money in their pockets and the debt. I would say probably every other house is healthcare. And what concerns them is the long waits that we have at the hospitals. I would say almost everyone that talks about the healthcare, it's either about themselves, their spouse, their mother, their father, someone that had to wait in the hallway for 8 hours to get looked at in the ER. Someone that had to wait months and months and months for surgery, and it's not the doctors and nurses that are the problem. They're the ones that will have the solution. I mean, it's hallway healthcare is just so unacceptable, and that people can't believe that we even have this predicament. We used to be the best in Canada. Now we're the worst. You know, we're the worst because we can't afford anything.
Okay, thank you. Terrence, the biggest issue that you're hearing at the door?
The biggest issue would easily include health, hydro, and seniors care. You know, those are the things that really impact people. We have to take a look at the way government operates, and we have to consider that these are things that the government should be providing to people. Now, we look at what Doug Ford is putting forward, and there's no real plan there. There is no platform, and people are afraid. People are afraid of what he is putting forward because they can't see anything. We know that conservative governments are fans of cutting and privatizing, and we know that the Liberals, everyone is disappointed. They feel let down by them. Kathleen Wynne has not lived up to her obligations, and we look at the hallway medicine, the skyrocketing price of hydro bills, and we look at the deplorable state of some of our seniors' care facilities. With Andrea Horvath and the NDP, though, we have a solid plan, and we're going to address all of these issues by lowering hydro rates, putting an end to hallway medicine, funding hospitals properly, and looking after our seniors.
Thank you. Once again, we're going to be giving some responses. First to Susan from the PC.
Thank you. We do have a plan, Terrence, as I said, with Doug Ford. We have a plan to reduce the mess that we're in right now, you know, from the Liberals and the NDP. We're investing in mental health, almost $2 billion. We're adding 30,000 new long-term care beds, and we're also investing in seniors. We're providing dental for 100,000 seniors on low income.
Okay, and you called it the Liberals there too, so I'll give Kate a chance to respond quickly there.
Sure. So I hear similar things in terms of healthcare and education, mental health, and so on that are important. But I also hear that people are kind of sick of politics, and people are really struggling in this election. You know, when you hear people and they use all their airtime to say, I don't like this, and just kind of the blame game, which doesn't help anyone get further ahead. And even worse, I think it costs people their sense of trust and confidence in government. People want better. People want politicians who are interested in actually working together to make change in people's lives. They're looking for a representative who listens, who doesn't promise everything will be perfect, but who's willing to work with other people.
Thank you, Kate. Paul, you didn't give your chance to give your response there. What are you hearing at the door?
Well, I'm hearing bus rapid transit, BRT. They don't want it. City Council's trying to ram it down everyone's throat. I can tell you right now, if there's provincial funding for transit, whether it's called BRT or not, it's going to be the BRT plan. So I am 100% opposed to the provincial pledge for funding for transit in London, or in any other city for that matter, that's planning one of these mammoth traffic congestion plans. Get people out of cars onto sardine can trains. Not a good idea. Also, this is not part of the BRT that people talk about much, but a huge part of the BRT is getting people out of detached homes and into 20-story buildings all along London's major throughways. We're replacing the forest city with what's going to end up being a concrete jungle. I don't like it. I don't think anyone in London wants it. And if you're, wanting to vote against the BRT, you need to vote for Paul McKeever.
Okay, thank you. And Kate, you already got a chance to respond. I did. You're good. Okay, so Carol?
Okay. I'm also hearing transit is the #1 topic that people are bringing up for me, but I see it differently. I personally support a better transit system for London. We need to be able to move people quickly. They need to get to their work. We are having a rising population of seniors, and they need to have the freedom and independence to get around. We also want to encourage more people to come to our city to work, and they need to be able to get around. Right now, you can sit on a lot of the roads and be stuck in traffic. If we build a great transportation system in our city, we can move people quickly. We can also reduce our carbon footprint. Right now, London does get very hot in the summer, and it gets worse because of the urban heat island effect. If we have more electric vehicles with a good, solid public transportation system, we can reduce the emissions in our city and make it a healthier place for everyone to live. It won't be a concrete jungle because we can invest in other ways to make our city green and actually live up to its forest city.
Okay, thank you. I am hearing definitely that transit is a major issue for Londoners, so let's talk a little bit about that. One of the biggest lines in the budget is the $11 billion that has been committed to the first phase of a high-speed rail project in the Toronto-Windsor corridor. This will, of course, have a major impact on Londoners. I'd like to know from you, is this money well spent? And we're going to be starting with Terrence Kernahan from the NDP.
Well, transit is a really important thing for everyone in Ontario. It's an economic equalizer. It also stimulates job growth and allows people to really explore some of the most amazing parts of southwestern Ontario. The NDP fully supports investments in transit because those are things that will bring an economic growth, like I said. Now, we know from Kathleen Wynne's government that they have spent a long time talking about the $11 billion in high-speed rail. And with Doug Ford's Conservatives, we have to be a little afraid. Are they going to try and turn this into a private system? Are they going to have massive cutbacks like in the TTC? With Andrea Horwath and the NDP, we want to get shovels in the ground. We want to also respect agricultural landowners, make sure that we're not severing properties, and make sure we do it the right way.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll let Kate and Susan address those issues when we come to their turn. We're going to keep moving down the line on this one. Paul, you made your voice your opinion's pretty clear about BRT. You feel the same way about the investment in high-speed rail?
Yeah, bad idea. If it were a good idea, it already would have been built by now. Look, to have any proper venture of this kind, it has to sustain itself through the monies that are paid to ride on the train. Nobody here seriously believes that a high-speed rail from Windsor to Toronto is going to be absolutely free of government subsidies. We all know that what will happen if this line is built is that the taxpayer will have to subsidize travel on it. And in fact, there will be only more pressures to get people out of cars on, for example, the 401, the 403, etc., so that they'll be feeling that the only way they can affordably get to work is on a high-speed transit. The other thing is, let's not forget that the real purpose for this high-speed rail is to turn places like London and Windsor into suburbs of Toronto. I don't think that's a good idea. I think investment has to happen in London. I think the jobs have to be in London. I think people need to be 5 minutes from work, not an hour and a half on a train from work.
Thank you. Kate?
Well, I love the passion, but I have quite a different perspective on this. I am unequivocally in support of high-speed rail. This has been talked about for 35 years in Ontario, a very long time, and we are finally seeing progress being made. There's been an environmental assessment underway for the past 2 years, which is designed to do exactly what we're talking about here. Look at what the economic impacts will be, look at what the ideal corridors would be, and all of those details that we need to know. There is nothing else we can do that will create more jobs in London and southwestern Ontario. It's thousands of person years of employment, and it also gives people other options to be able to travel. People driving in cars down the 401, which is not only highly unpleasant, but it's also a leading contributor of greenhouse gas emissions. Giving people a greener alternative is really important both for our planet, but also for our economy.
Thank you. Carol, your perspective.
The Southwest Ontario definitely needs an improved rail system. We need to be able to move goods and services quicker. We need to be able to move people quicker. And as Kate says, if we can get people off the roads, that's going to go a long way to reducing our carbon emissions. But we need to look at what is the best rail system for Southwestern Ontario. There is the possibility of doing high-performance rail. Perhaps high-speed rail is something that would come in later. We need to look at all the options because a high-speed rail will go through prime agricultural land. It may also destroy valuable wetlands, and we have already lost over 70% of our wetlands over the last century, and those in themselves provide enormous services in regards to flood control and climate change regulation. So we need to make sure we have a really solid rail system, but we need to know what kind of system that's going to be and is it the best for our city. We cannot let London become an isolated hub away from Toronto. We need to move people, but what is the best way to do it?
Thank you, Carol. And Susan?
Thank you. Kate mentioned that we've been talking about this for 35 years, which is true, and we've also been talking about it again in 2014 in the Liberals' election platform. Doug Ford has spent his whole life fighting to build a better transit, and high-speed rail would be a game changer for Southwestern Ontario. It will take cars off the highway. It will create jobs, and I've always supported anything that has infrastructure and creates job when I was a member of Parliament. So we'll wait and see what the environmental assessment has to say.
Okay. I think we'd like to, I want to move on because I want to make sure we have the chance to talk about education. This is a very important issue for a lot of Ontarians, especially young families, young people entering post-secondary education. Right now, the average Ontario student graduates from post-secondary more than $25,000 in debt. How would you keep education accessible for all Ontarians? And we'll be starting this time with Paul McKeever from the Freedom Party.
The only way to keep post-secondary education affordable really is to think about new ways of delivering it. I have 2 sons right now in university. I think my eldest had a $25,000 debt just between tuition and residence alone for 1 year. He'll come out probably with $100,000 in a 4-year program of engineering. Same with the other son, computer science. The only way to make sure that we can cut costs is by new delivery systems. There's all kinds of online universities they're popping up, delivering actual diplomas. These are reputable universities. That's one model we can look to. But the other thing is we have to remember that, education is something we earn. We don't just learn to earn the knowledge. We have to work as students in the summers, or even while we're studying, to pay down our own debts and take personal responsibility. I think that's a thing that every student needs to learn. That's what my students, or my sons are learning as students. And I think we need to take both of those approaches.
Okay, thank you. Kate?
So a student's ability to get an education should be based on their ability to learn, not their ability to pay. And we do know that tuition has become increasingly unaffordable. So in the last 2 years, we have seen a total transformation of our OSAP system. There's now about 270,000 students across Ontario right now attending post-secondary education who wouldn't have been able to without those changes. I actually met a woman at the door yesterday, and she is an ODSP recipient, and she wants to become a social worker. She's in her mid-40s, and she wants to retrain, and she would not have been able to do that without these changes. So investing in people and in their education is not only helps people today, but also prepares our workforce and our economy for tomorrow.
Thank you. Carol?
The Green Party would eventually like to see that public education for undergrads is free. We know that's not going to happen immediately, so right now we would like to see tuition freezes. But if we could step back, one of the things that is really important is to take care of our students while they're going to school. They can be working jobs, but often they are underemployed and they can barely afford food. So under the Green Party plan of having a basic guaranteed income, anybody, even if you are a single mother returning back, trying to get an education so you can better the lives for yourself and your children, anyone can go back and go to school and know that they have that safety net to pay their bills and be able to pay for their homes while still earning a solid education. That will go a long way to reducing some of the debt that people are crushed with after their graduation.
Thank you. Susan?
Thank you. I've said it in the past and I'll say it again. I mean, free tuition would be great, but it's not free. Free tuition is not free. Someone has to pay for that free tuition, and it's on the backs of the taxpayers. The issue of student debt is alarming and it has to be addressed. However, to enact class warfare to say that despite taking out loans and applying for grants, because your parents earn more than your friend beside you, you don't qualify for free tuition. How is that fair? Because your parents have worked really hard. They make more than the rate that they're suggesting. And so you don't qualify. You have to pay your own tuition. I mean, somebody always has to pay in the end.
Okay, thank you. Terrence?
Education is something I'm extremely passionate about, needless to say, being an educator. I've worked with many students and families, and I can see there were so many who, if they weren't born in the right place or weren't born with the right last name, they couldn't continue on to post-secondary education, and that's simply not fair. I think education is the one way in which people can move among social classes, and I think that's really important. The Conservatives have no plan to invest in education, which is really troubling. We know from the elementary system they cut $1 billion out of that, and we've been reeling ever since. The Liberals now have a last-minute plan to invest in post-secondary education, but with Andrea Horvath and the NDP, what we want to do is we want to change student loans into grants. That way all people in Ontario can access a great education and innovate in the future. We also want to take and eliminate the interest on existing student loans, and that way people aren't being having to pay for too long.
Okay, thank you. I know that there were some call-outs there, but we are getting short on time, so I want to keep moving on. I do have a question that I think is important to a lot of Ontarians. As we know, we have a rising number of seniors in our province, and for the number of retirees living in Ontario, pension security is a major issue, so something that we haven't talked about just yet. How would you ensure that pension plans are properly funded so that retirees know the funds are going to be there when they need them? And we'll be starting this time with Kate Graham from the Liberal Party.
Sure. So this is an area where our record is very strong. We know that retirement income is important to people's economic, social, and so on well-being. Kathleen Wynne has led the charge across Canada to transform CPP to make sure that that system is more affordable. It's today benefiting thousands of Ontarians. The changes that she pushed for are now being implemented across Ontario. We're also taking good care of looking at employer-provided plans. We need to make sure that employers are able to fulfill their obligations to their employees, but there is a fund that's set up to support people when that doesn't fall through. So So this is a really important issue and one that I'm glad we're talking about today, and one where the Liberal record is very strong.
Thank you. Carol, on funding pension plans.
Yes, we believe that the pension should be honored. And there are those times, though, when things happen, and it's really unfortunate when you have worked your entire life and then you find that you do not have the pension that you thought you were going to have. Again, it takes us back to this idea of having a basic guaranteed income, so that should, God forbid, you lose your pension for whatever reason, with your employer not supplying it to you, you know that you at least have that safety net. And at the same time, we have other policies to make sure that you can afford to live with dignity later on, by having free dental care and free medicines, and funding the other areas that are really important in your life as you are a senior.
Thank you. Susan?
I agree that employers should have to fulfill their commitments to pensioners, and they should fulfill their commitment to pensioners. We can allow them to not follow through, and then seniors are the ones who are suffering. Seniors must live in dignity, and we have to make sure that we're always looking after our seniors. We also are providing dental care for 100,000 low-income seniors to make sure that they're looked after and that they have dignity when they're older.
Okay, thank you. Terrence, on funding pension plans.
After working your entire life, can you imagine not having an income and not being able to enjoy your life? That's just simply unacceptable. I can't even begin to imagine what some people have to go through. That's not right. You know, a good pension plan is the key to a happy retirement and a healthy retirement. With the NDP, we want all seniors to have universal dental care and pharmacare, not limiting it to income in the case of the Conservatives, or limiting age in terms of prescription drugs with the Liberals. Now, we saw the Sears workers who were left out in the cold after that trouble. Now, we want to make sure with Andrew Horvath and the NDP to increase the pension benefit guarantee fund, and that would be a guaranteed amount for seniors, and also it would be indexed to inflation. That would be something that seniors can count on and make sure that they can enjoy their retirement.
Okay, and Paul?
Well, you're getting to my bailiwick, actually, at this point. I've been an employment lawyer for 21 years. I've seen both sides of the fence, so I can tell you a little bit about what's going on. To a large extent, I mean, you have to remember that pension law is very intricate, very complex. We'd never be able to sit around the table and come up with a 2-second answer to how to make things more secure. I can tell you there's also there's currently a great deal of regulation to make sure that people don't run off with the cash, as it were. Okay, but here's what's happening in practice. What's happening in practice is that the defined benefit plans are being wrapped up. The defined contribution plans are taking their place. That's largely the case in the private sector. I suspect it might be the trend going forward with contract employees and et cetera in government. I see this as more a problem that's going to work itself out over time. I think the legwork has already been done to make sure that people don't run into problems where they can't get their pension money when they need it.
Okay, thank you. We have time for just one more quick question before we get to closing statements to get to know you just a little bit better. We'll just do 30 seconds for this one. I'd like to know, do you live in your riding? And how will you represent the needs of your constituents at Queen's Park if elected? We'll be starting with Carol on this one.
Hi, yeah, I live in my riding, and the way that I would represent my constituents is to listen to all of their concerns. I work really hard volunteering every single day on multiple organizations, and I would bring that same energy to Queen's Park, because I do everything that I do because I genuinely want to make this a better city to live in.
Thank you, Carol. Susan?
Thank you. I don't live in London North Centre. I live in London. We have our business in the heart of London, which is in downtown London. And it's extremely important to work with your constituents. I had an open door policy when I was a member of Parliament. Everybody had my cell phone numbers, and they have my cell phone numbers now when we're canvassing. And you have to keep in contact. You have to work hard for your constituents. I always did, and I always will. And you know, it's the job of an MPP to represent your constituents, businesses, and organizations, and that's what we're hired for.
Thank you, Susan. Terrence, do you live in the riding?
I currently live just outside of the riding. I was looking toward moving into the riding, but needless to say, life became a little bit more complicated in August when pursuing the nomination. However, you know, I have lived in the riding previously. I also did almost all of my schooling here, having gone to Beale Secondary School, as well as Huron University College, Western, and then Althouse College. Apparently I couldn't get enough of the education system here in London. But also, I believe that it's really important. We have fantastic areas in London North Centre. I remember spending so much time going around.
Sorry, that's your time. It is a short one.
30 seconds.
Yeah. Paul, do you live in the riding?
I don't. I live in the GTA. I'm party leader, though, so my duties are a little different than some of the candidates here. My duties are right across the province. Wherever we have a candidate running, I have to be there. So I'm sort of in the middle of the province. However, I have lived and worked in London, Ontario. I articled at Cohen Hiley, the local law firm. I studied at Western for several years, from 89 to 95, and lived in Woodfield, historic Woodfield in London North Centre, the best times of my life. Loved walking down to Victoria Park. If elected here, I'll be moving right on back.
Thank you. And Kate.
I live in Oldies Village, just around the corner actually from where we are today, and I've lived in 8 different neighborhoods in London North Centre. It's really important to me that our next MPP is someone who really understands this community and puts a lot of time and energy into listening to people in London North Centre. That's exactly what I've been doing for the last 10 years as a public servant. It's what I've done as a volunteer, it's what I've been doing as a candidate, and it's what I'll do as your MPP.
So that is all the time we have for questions. Thank you very much for all your participation here today. Great discussion. We are going to hear from each of the candidates one more time. With the time we have left, we'll be allowing 45 seconds for closing statements, and we will be going in the reverse order of their opening statements, which means we'll be starting with Carol Dick from the Green Party. So Carol, whenever you're ready.
So from coast to coast, Canadians are recognizing that we cannot separate the economy from the environment, and that we cannot continue to do business as usual and not suffer the social and financial consequences of climate change, polluted waterways, and contaminated air. We must make a difference. And Greens have been elected across Canada in recent elections, in British Columbia, in New Brunswick, in Prince Edward Island, and to Ottawa. This June, Ontario could make history and again elect dedicated, qualified Green Party candidates to Queen's Park, where we could bring a new voice with innovative ideas. If you have any questions about the Green Party, about the vision, you can go to gpo.ca, and you can always contact me personally. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. For the Liberal Party, Kate Graham.
So this election is really important, and we have heard today about issues that affect our city and affect our lives as Londoners. And with any election, there's a lot of unknowns, but we do know that on June the 8th, we will have a new MPP for London North Centre. It needs to be someone who really understands this community, who listens to Londoners, and who would work tirelessly on our behalf. We also don't know what the landscape will look like, so it needs to be someone who can work with people even when their ideas are different from their own. That's why I'm running to be your MPP. That's why I'd encourage you to step up and get involved in this election. You can learn more about me at votekate.ca, and on June the 7th, I would love to have your support.
Thank you, Kate. For the Freedom Party, Paul McKeever.
Well, yes, I hope today you've learned a little bit about how the candidates on this panel differ. You've heard from me. I think I've made it clear that Paul McKeever, the Freedom Party candidate, I'm the only candidate against provincial funding for the BRT. I'm the only candidate here against the Windsor to Toronto high-speed rail, which will cost us billions and will be taxpayer subsidized. Freedom Party and myself are the only candidate in this riding, and probably in any other Freedom Party riding where we're running, that's offering a balanced budget this year and every year. So again, I ask you to remember, if there's only one thing you remember about me coming out of this debate, it should be these 3 words: no new spending. If you agree, vote for Paul McKeever, your Freedom Party candidate, on June 7th. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. For the NDP, Terence Kernahan.
Thank you, Christine. This has been an enjoyable debate. We know that London and Ontario want change. Kathleen Wynne and the Liberals have failed to fix our healthcare. They lied about hydro. Doug Ford's lack of a plan is even worse. People in London are worried that Doug Ford's going to cut and privatize the services that they rely on. But we don't have to keep switching between bad and worse. Andrea Horwath is the leader who always says what she's going to do and does what she says. Andrea Horwath's team is going to bring change for the better. My name is Terence Kernahan, and lend me your vote on June 7th, and let's get good things done for London North Centre. Thank you.
Thank you, Terence. And for the Progressive Conservative, Susan Trupe.
Thank you. 4 more years of higher taxes, wasteful spending, and hallway health care under Wynne and Horwath cannot happen. Our thriving community is now a shadow of what it once was. After 15 years of darkness, help is on the way. With your support, June 7th will mark the dawn of a new day in our community. A progressive Conservative government will be focused on delivering on what matters to London: job crisis, health care, hospital wait times, fixing the hydro mess, and most of all, putting money back in your pockets. I'm running because our city deserves leadership at Queen's Park, and there is only one choice. My name is Susan Trupe, and I'm running as the London North Centre PC Ontario candidate. And I would like your vote on June 7th. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid that's all the time we have today, but I would like to thank all the candidates for attending, taking time out of your busy schedules. I think it was very valuable for our viewers. When the polls close on June 7th, be sure to tune in to Rogers TV for in-depth analysis of the results. Until then, I'm Christine Telesky.